Can people really change? It's one of those questions that seems simple until it's about someone you love, or worse, yourself. You've heard the sayings, once a cheater, always a cheater. A man doesn't change, he just hides better. People are who they are. We repeat these lines like protection spells, hoping to shield ourselves from the pain of false hope. Because we've seen it. People who say they'll change, people who promise they're different, people who cry, swear, repent, and then go right back to who they were. And so we grow skeptical, cautious, cold. We stop asking whether people can change and start asking, why do we keep believing they will? But here's the truth, most never say out loud. We want to believe in change, because if people can't change, then neither can we. If we are only ever the sum of our past mistakes, our inherited patterns, our pain, then what's the point of struggle? What's the point of therapy, or prayer, or self-reflection, or late-night promises whispered to ourselves when no one else is listening? If people don't change, then healing is a lie, forgiveness is foolish, and becoming better is just theater. But deep down, something in us resists that. Something ancient, something hopeful, something that knows that while change is rare, painful, and slow, it is possible. As Carl Jung said, people don't change by thinking, they change by becoming conscious. This isn't about quick fixes. This is about death and rebirth, the death of who we've been, the birth of who we might become. So, can people change? Psychology, philosophy, and lived experience offer different answers. But what they agree on is this: change, real change, isn't cheap. It demands grief, it demands truth, and most of all, it demands courage. Let's begin. Your brain is not fixed, your patterns are not final, you are not finished. At the heart of modern psychology is one revolutionary truth: change is possible, not just metaphorically, but biologically, neurologically, emotionally. For decades, the brain was thought to be hardwired, a rigid machine built in childhood and cemented by early experience. But that myth has collapsed. Today, we know about neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself throughout life. Every time you break a habit, learn a new skill, or choose a different emotional response, you are literally reshaping your brain's architecture. So yes, people can change, but not by wanting to. They change by doing, repeating, failing, trying again, and eventually becoming. In therapy, this plays out in several models. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. CBT is built on the premise that our thoughts shape our emotions, and our emotions shape our behavior. Change begins by catching those thoughts, those automatic patterns that say, "I'm not good enough," or "I always mess up," and replacing them with truth. It sounds simple. It's not. It requires awareness. It requires practice. But over time, it works. Internal Family Systems, IFS, teaches that the mind is made up of parts: wounded inner children, protective managers, exiles holding trauma. We don't change by suppressing these parts. We change by befriending them, listening to them, healing them. When those inner voices are heard, the nervous system begins to relax. The survival patterns lose their grip, and something new emerges. Not a better version of ourselves, but a truer one. Attachment theory and relationship repair. People shaped by abandonment, betrayal, or neglect can learn to trust again, not by logic, but through consistent emotional safety. Therapists call this earned secure attachment. It's not a miracle, it's slow, it's scary, but it happens. And here's what most psychological models agree on. Change doesn't start with behavior, it starts with safety, then honesty, then repetition, and then, evolution. But if change is biologically and emotionally possible, why do so few people do it? That's the next descent. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Carl Jung. To Jung, change was not just difficult, it was sacred. While psychology today often focuses on behavior and cognition, Jung aimed deeper. He wasn't interested in simply fixing symptoms. He wanted to transform the soul. And for that, you had to face what he called the shadow. The shadow is the part of ourselves we refuse to look at. It holds our anger, envy, selfishness, repressed wounds, but also our abandoned creativity, joy, and wildness. It is everything we deny, everything we hide, not just from others, but from ourselves. And here's the paradox: the longer we avoid the shadow, the more it controls us. That's why people repeat toxic patterns, why they sabotage love, why they hurt others in the exact ways they were hurt. It's not because they can't change, it's because they haven't made their shadow conscious. Jung believed true transformation comes through a process he called individuation, the lifelong task of integrating the conscious and unconscious, the light and dark, the known and unknown parts of ourselves. Individuation is not self-improvement. It's not becoming better, it's becoming whole, but it comes at a cost, because to individuate, you must die to who you were. You must face your patterns. You must grieve what you've lost or never had. You must admit the roles you've played, the masks you've worn, the truths you've avoided. And then, from that confrontation, something new can emerge. A deeper voice, a quieter strength, a way of being that feels less like performance and more like home. That is change. Not cosmetic, but archetypal. Not a new habit, but a new relationship to yourself. And for Jung, that journey wasn't optional for those who suffer. The privilege of a lifetime, he said, is to become who you truly are. Most people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. If change is possible, why don't more people do it? Why do so many repeat the same cycles? Why do we cling to habits that hurt us? Why do some people go decades without ever looking inward? Because change is not just about growth, it's about loss. Real change requires the death of something familiar, an identity, a coping mechanism, a belief that once kept us safe, even if it now keeps us small. This is why people don't change when they should. They change only when the cost of staying the same becomes unbearable. The fear of letting go. Change demands we release what we've outgrown. But what if that old pain is the only thing you've ever known? The anger that protects you, the shame that keeps you humble, the busyness that keeps you from feeling. Letting go isn't just frightening, it's destabilizing. Even suffering can feel safer than the unknown. As James Hollis said, we are not afraid of death, we are afraid of life, of the cost of truly living. The weight of identity. People don't cling to patterns because they work. They cling because they've built a self around them. The overachiever, the people pleaser, the loner, the tough one, the one who always bounces back. To change would mean challenging the story that says, "This is who I am." But that's terrifying, because who are you without the story? The nervous system's loyalty to the past. Psychologically, we are built for survival, not transformation. The body remembers trauma. The nervous system prioritizes safety over freedom. So even if your conscious mind says, "I want to change," your unconscious mind may whisper, "But I'd rather feel safe." This is why transformation doesn't begin with motivation. It begins with grief, with honesty, with the unraveling of certainty. Most people never start that journey, not because they're weak, but because they've been taught to fear their own depths. Become who you are. Friedrich Nietzsche. Friedrich Nietzsche didn't believe in comfort. He believed in confrontation. Where most seek healing through peace, Nietzsche demanded something more brutal, self-overcoming. To him, change wasn't about becoming better. It was about becoming true, burning away what was false, weak, inherited, and unconscious, until only the essential remains. And that process, it's not gentle. It's a form of internal war. Nietzsche saw most people as trapped in what he called herd morality. They follow the crowd. They obey. They conform to the values passed down by religion, culture, or society, never questioning whether those values are theirs. They don't live. They replicate. They don't become. They inherit. And so, for Nietzsche, real change only happens when a person stops seeking validation and begins seeking truth, when they stop performing and start confronting, not others, but themselves. Self-overcoming means breaking away from the roles you've been handed, naming your fears instead of avoiding them, giving up victimhood and stepping into responsibility, learning how to live with power, not excuses. It means waking up one day and realizing you've been living someone else's life, and then deciding to walk away from it. But it also means loneliness, because the path of becoming who you are often requires leaving behind who you were and who others need you to be. Nietzsche wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." But finding that why often requires descending into chaos, facing everything you were never allowed to say, think, or feel, and rebuilding from the ashes. Most people won't do it, because self-overcoming is not about becoming successful. It's about becoming authentic, no matter the cost. It's about choosing evolution over acceptance, solitude over performance, freedom over comfort. And in that choice, even if the world never understands you, you finally understand yourself. Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself. Jean-Paul Sartre. If Nietzsche was the hammer, the existentialists were the silence that followed. They didn't shout about power, they whispered about freedom, a heavier freedom, a terrifying freedom. Because to them, the real question was, never can people change. It was, why don't they accept that they can? Sartre. You are always choosing. Jean-Paul Sartre believed we are condemned to be free. That's not liberation, that's pressure. Because if you are free, then you are always choosing. And if you are always choosing, then you are responsible, not just for what you do, but for who you are becoming. There is no hiding behind trauma, upbringing, or even your past. The man you are today is your project, and that truth either awakens you or paralyzes you. To not choose, Sartre warned, is still a choice. So when someone says, "I can't change," they may mean, "I don't want to take responsibility for what that change would cost." Kierkegaard, the leap of faith. Søren Kierkegaard saw the same burden, but framed it with more soul. He believed that change, real change, is not a rational decision. It's a leap into the unknown, a leap away from the safe and structured identity we've created, into a space of uncertainty, anxiety, even despair. Kierkegaard called this the dizziness of freedom, the moment when all roles fall away and you realize you are not who you thought you were, and you don't yet know who you could be. It is in this moment, this spiritual vertigo, where transformation becomes possible. But few stay long enough in that silence. They reach for distractions, old stories, familiar masks, because freedom isn't comfortable, it's holy. A change is not a feeling, it's a choice. The existentialists teach us that change begins not in motivation or healing or even clarity. It begins the moment you say, This life, this pattern, this version of me is no longer acceptable, and from that choice, everything else begins. Transformation is not a future event, it is a present activity. Gillian Michaels. We talk about change like it's a decision, a single moment, a switch flipped, a sudden awakening. But real change doesn't arrive with fireworks. It comes like a slow undoing. At first it feels like confusion. You no longer believe what you used to believe. The things you once tolerated now feel unbearable. The stories you've told yourself for years begin to sound false or incomplete. And so, the work begins. Not loud, not cinematic, but in quiet, private choices no one sees. Change looks like putting the bottle down and sitting with the ache it was numbing. Change looks like telling the truth, even if your voice shakes. Change looks like walking away, not just from others, but from the version of yourself that accepted less than you deserved. It looks like grief, like mornings where you feel nothing, like days when you fall back into the old self, but catch it faster this time and choose differently, because that's what real change is, not perfection, but pattern disruption, catching yourself, pausing, choosing again and again. The cycle of real change. Awareness. Something's wrong. Resistance. But this is who I've always been. Discomfort. I don't know who I am without this. Choice. I'm going to try something different. Relapse. I slipped. Recommitment. But I'm still going. Integration. This is part of me now. Most people want the new life. Very few want to face the death of the old one. Because change, when it's real, asks you to give up control. It doesn't just change your behavior, it rearranges your soul. And it's not linear. Some days you'll feel strong. Others you'll feel like a fraud. That's not failure. That's how rebirth feels from the inside. The only thing consistent in real transformation is this. You never go back to fully being who you were. Even if you falter, even if you relapse, you've seen something, and once seen, it cannot be unseen. The only journey is the one within. Rainer Maria Rilke. So, can people change? Yes, but not in the way most imagine, not overnight, not without pain, and never without cost. Because real change is a kind of death, the death of identity, the death of certainty, the death of the roles we were praised for or punished into. To truly change is to step outside of who the world told you to be and listen, maybe for the first time, to the voice that was buried beneath the noise. That voice doesn't shout, it whispers, and its message is both terrifying and liberating. You are not who you think you are. To hear that voice and follow it is to lose comfort, approval, and sometimes even people. But in losing those things, you make space for something else. Clarity, congruence, freedom. As Carl Jung said, man needs difficulties. They are necessary for health. Because it is in the struggle, in the tension between who we are and who we could be, that the soul is forged. So yes, people can change. They can stop the generational patterns. They can become gentler, braver, wiser, freer. They can leave behind the mask. They can face the shadow. They can become someone new. But they will pay for it, in ego, in safety, in time. The question is not, can people change? It never was. The real question is, what in you must die for something new to live?